The room fell into silence the moment the will was read. A silence so deep it seemed to distort gravity itself. The gathered nobles, military leaders, and advisors of the Karani Empire, one of the most dominant alien civilizations in the known galaxy, stood frozen, their gazes locked onto the trembling hand of the royal scribe. Even the air itself felt heavier, as if the very fabric of reality couldn't quite process what had just been declared. As per the late Emperor Zetherian's final decree, the scribe's voice wavered, struggling to maintain composure. His 4 royal daughters shall be transferred into the care and authority of one human male. Gasps erupted across the chamber. A noblewoman fainted. Someone choked on their own breath. At the very center of it all, standing before the imperial throne, was me. A human, not a galactic warlord, not a seasoned diplomat, not an interstellar conqueror, just a human. My name is Daniel Kane, and up until an hour ago, I was just an ambassador from Earth, sent to this empire to negotiate trade deals and ensure that humanity wasn't seen as an irrelevant backwater species. I had shaken hands, attended diplomatic banquets, and tried my best not to get vaporized in a cultural misunderstanding. And now? Now, I had somehow inherited 4 alien princesses. They stood before me, 4 towering, strikingly beautiful Karani women, each with the same otherworldly features: violet-hued skin, elongated horns curling back like royal crowns, and luminous silver eyes that could pierce through a man's soul. 4 daughters of an emperor, 4 living embodiments of the empire's legacy, and all of them mine. The oldest Valeth took a single step forward. Her aura was suffocating, commanding, merciless, like a queen already accustomed to the weight of a crown. A warrior, draped in black ceremonial armor, her physique was sculpted with the precision of a warrior goddess. She looked like she could tear through an army without breaking a sweat. Her lips curled into a sneer of pure disgust. This must be a joke. Next to her, Zirena, the second-born, crossed her arms, her tail flicking behind her with irritation. Clad in a flowing diplomatic robe, she was more refined, her beauty sharper, colder, like the edge of a dagger concealed beneath silk. Unlike her sister, she didn't radiate raw aggression. No, her power was quieter, more insidious. She was a strategist, a manipulator, and right now I could feel the weight of her calculating gaze tearing through me, already plotting her way out of this. Father must have been poisoned, she mused, her voice dripping with venom. Or senile. The third princess, Solara, was different. She stood slightly behind her sisters, eyes wide, lips parted as if trying to find the right words. Her presence was softer, but no less striking. A scholar draped in deep blue ceremonial fabrics, her arms covered in intricate golden tattoos that shimmered with arcane energy. A priestess, or perhaps a scientist. Unlike her older sisters, she wasn't immediately filled with hostility. Instead, her expression held something far more dangerous. Curiosity. A human, she murmured. Why would father choose a human? And then there was the youngest, Nixiri. Unlike her sisters, she was unrestrained in her fury. Her hands curled into fists, her fangs bared in a snarl, her tail whipping behind her like a beast barely held in check. This is a disgrace, she spat, stepping forward as if she was about to tear me apart herself. I would rather be executed than handed over to a primitive species. This is an insult to our entire bloodline. The weight of their stares crushed down on me. It didn't matter that I had never asked for this. It didn't matter that I had no idea what Emperor Zetherian had been thinking. All that mattered was that I was now standing in the center of an impossible storm. 4 royal daughters, each with their own agendas, their own grievances, and their own lethal capabilities. And now, by royal decree, they belonged to me. A throne built on chaos. The courtroom erupted into chaos. The nobles were shouting. Military officials were demanding an annulment of the decree. And somewhere in the crowd, someone was already drafting assassination orders. I took a deep breath, forcing myself to keep my expression neutral. Panicking would only make this worse. I don't understand, I said carefully, turning to the royal council. Why would Emperor Cytherian do this? The royal scribe swallowed nervously. The decree was sealed in his personal vault, he said. It is legally unchangeable. The late emperor's words are absolute law. So, that's it? I gestured to the 4 furious alien women. They're just mine now. You speak as if we are livestock, Valith snarled. You speak as if you have a choice. One of the older nobles snapped at her. You are bound by the will of your father. To resist this decree is treason. For a brief, chilling moment, the 4 sisters fell silent. Even Nyxiri, still radiating fury, hesitated. That was the power of Karani law. The empire was built on absolute loyalty, and Emperor Cytherian had left them no loopholes, for better or worse. They were mine now. A slow realization crawled through me. This wasn't just about inheritance. This wasn't just some royal mistake. This was a power play. The emperor had done this for a reason. The Karani Empire was in turmoil. A succession war was inevitable. And yet, instead of leaving the throne to any of his daughters, he had tied them all to a human outsider, to me. Why? Before I could get any answers, the royal guards stepped forward, their weapons gleaming under the courtroom's grand chandeliers. It is decided, the head guard declared. By order of Emperor Cytherians, the 4 royal daughters shall be escorted to their new residence alongside their rightful guardian. I barely had time to react before the guards surrounded me. The princesses were no different. Valith's glare could have melted steel. Zarena was already whispering to herself, undoubtedly recalculating every move, and Nyxiri looked like she was seriously considering murder. Solara, however, simply studied me. Her silver eyes burned with quiet intensity. This will be interesting, she murmured, and with that, I was escorted away. 4 furious alien princesses at my side, an entire empire waiting to see how this would unfold, and the weight of an emperor's final decision pressing down on my shoulders. This was only the beginning. The palace I was taken to was unlike anything I had ever seen, a sprawling citadel of obsidian and violet crystal. It loomed over the cityscape like a divine relic from a forgotten era. Towers stretched toward the sky, their spires laced with intricate golden filigree that pulsed with an otherworldly energy. The air itself carried a faint, electric hum, as if the very walls were alive with latent power. The Karani didn't just build their palaces. They forged them from the bones of stars, and now this one was mine. The moment we arrived, the 4 princesses wasted no time in making their thoughts known. Valith moved like a storm, her armoured boots striking the marble floor with measured, deliberate force. Every step radiated dominance, every flick of her clawed fingers an unspoken warning. The eldest princess was a woman carved from war itself, her body a temple to discipline, her soul a battlefield of unwavering pride. She did not speak as she strode past me into the main hall, but her silence was heavier than a warship descending from orbit. Zarena was the opposite. The moment she stepped inside, she moved with the languid grace of a predator too amused to strike. Yet, draped in ceremonial robes that accentuated every curve, she glanced at me over her shoulder, silver eyes gleaming with something unreadable. You do realize, she murmured, her voice barely above a whisper, that you have no idea what you're doing. I exhaled slowly, forcing myself to hold her gaze. I didn't ask for this. No, she said, tilting her head slightly, which makes it all the more fascinating. Solara was silent as she entered, her violet skin illuminated by the ethereal glow of the palace's hovering lanterns. Unlike her sisters, she did not project hostility. Instead, she watched, measured, calculated. She was the scholar, the philosopher, the one who saw beyond the immediate power struggle. But the way she studied me sent an uneasy chill down my spine, like she was trying to decipher an equation written in an unfamiliar language. Then there was Nixiri, the youngest, the firebrand, the one who didn't hold back. She stormed past the guards, her long tail lashing behind her like a whip, her fangs bared in sheer, unfiltered rage. "This is absurd," she snarled, whirling to face me. "I refuse to accept this farce. I refuse to be shackled to a human." Before I could respond, she turned to the royal attendants who had followed us inside. "The decree can be challenged. I demand to—" "The decree is absolute," one of the elder advisors interrupted. "To defy it is to defy the emperor's final will. You know what that means." A deathly silence followed. Nixiri's jaw clenched, her breath sharp with fury, but she didn't argue. She couldn't. That was the weight of their father's command. That was the weight of imperial law. For a brief moment, the reality of it all settled around us like an unspoken curse. No matter how much they hated it, no matter how much they despised me, they were bound to this fate. And so was I, a new reality. The chamber we were led into was no less imposing than the rest of the palace. It was a grand hall, lined with towering windows that framed the starlit expanse beyond. Silk banners embroidered with the imperial sigil hung from the ceiling, their golden threads glinting in the dim light. A single table sat at the center of the room, surrounded by high-backed chairs. The seating arrangement was intentional. The four princesses took their places across from me, their expressions ranging from thinly veiled contempt to quiet scrutiny. For a moment, no one spoke. Then, Vailith leaned forward, placing her hands flat against the polished surface of the table. "You are not my husband." Her voice was like steel, unyielding, razor-sharp. I met her gaze. "I never said I was." She narrowed her eyes. "You are not my ruler." "I don't want to be. You are not my equal." I hesitated. "That we'll see about." Her lips curled in something that wasn't quite a smile, more of a warning, a promise. Zerena exhaled a quiet laugh. "How amusing. He thinks he has a say in this." "I do," I said, shifting my gaze toward her, "because, like it or not, we're all in the same mess now." She leaned back, fingers tracing along the rim of her goblet. "Oh, you misunderstand. We are not in a mess. You are." Solara, who had remained silent until now, finally spoke. "He is correct about one thing." The others turned to her. The Emperor did this with intent. Her silver eyes flickered toward me. "You were chosen for a reason." I frowned. "Do you have any idea why?" She tilted her head slightly. "Perhaps. But I would rather hear your theory first." I exhaled, running a hand through my hair. It wasn't just political. If the Emperor had wanted to secure alliances, he would have married them off to other noble houses. If he had wanted to prevent infighting, he could have named a single heir and exiled the others. Instead, he had tied all four of them to an outsider, to a species the Qur'ani barely acknowledged as significant. To a human, the room was too quiet. I could feel their eyes on me, testing, weighing. "Maybe," I said slowly, "he thought I was the only one who could keep you from tearing each other apart." For a moment, no one spoke. Then Nixiri scoffed. "You think you can control us?" "No," I said. "I think that's exactly the point. I can't. And that's why I was chosen." Solara tapped a single finger against the table. "Interesting." Vailith's expression darkened. "This changes nothing." Zerena smiled. "Oh, I wouldn't be so sure about that, dear sister." Nixiri looked ready to punch something. And me? I had the distinct feeling that my life had just become far, far more complicated than I had ever imagined. The next few days were a whirlwind of chaos, power plays, and unspoken threats wrapped in the velvet of diplomacy. The palace itself was a beast, an endless labyrinth of towering halls and intricately woven corridors that seemed to shift and breathe like a living entity. Servants moved with eerie silence, their eyes averted, their motions rehearsed to perfection, as if they themselves were merely another part of the imperial machine. Every corner of this place had history seared into its bones, the weight of generations pressing down with the cold inevitability of time. And in the center of it all, I was expected to stand firm, expected to act like I belonged, like I could control the situation. But let's be real, that was a delusion. I wasn't just walking into the lion's den. I had been shackled inside of it, surrounded by predators who weren't sure if they wanted to tolerate me, test me, or tear me apart, just to see how I bled. The four princesses made that very clear. Vaelith, with her militant precision, wasted no time in asserting dominance. Every conversation was a battle, every glance a silent reminder of how much she despised this arrangement. I learned quickly that she operated on a system of absolute control. She had spent her life leading, strategizing, winning. Now, she was forced into something where she wasn't the one making the calls. And that made her seethe. Zerena, on the other hand, was a different kind of threat. A softer, more insidious one. She played the long game, weaving words like silk, spinning conversations into traps that you wouldn't notice until you were already ensnared. She was amused by my presence, by the absurdity of it all. But beneath that amusement was something more dangerous. Calculation, curiosity, the quiet pleasure of watching someone squirm just to see how they'd react. Solara remained the enigma. She didn't challenge me outright, nor did she openly toy with me like Zerena. Instead, she watched, studied. Her intelligence was razor-sharp, her patience endless. She had the air of someone who had already mapped out every potential outcome, and she was merely waiting to see which one I would choose to stumble into. I could feel her analysis like a weight against my skin, pressing, testing, searching for fractures in my resolve. And then there was Nixiri, the youngest, the most volatile, the one who took this personally. Where the others played the game with strategy and subtlety, Nixiri wielded her emotions like a weapon, raw and unchecked. She didn't hide her contempt. She didn't try to wrap it in political niceties or carefully worded barbs. No, she made it known, in every glare, in every scoff, in every sharp, venom-laced word that left her lips. "This is insanity," she hissed one night at dinner, pushing her plate away with enough force to nearly topple the goblet beside it. Our father was a fool to decree this. Across the table, Vaelith's grip tightened around the stem of her own glass. "Careful," she warned. "You speak of the Emperor. I speak of a mistake," Nixiri snapped. "A mistake that has chained us to—" She gestured toward me, expression contorted with frustration. "This!" I exhaled, setting my utensils down. "You know, you could just use my name." Nixiri's fangs bared slightly. "I'd rather choke on ash." Zerena let out a low, amused hum, swirling the deep violet liquid in her glass. "Well, this is getting interesting." Solara, as always, remained silent, observing, calculating. I met Nixiri's glare head-on. "You think I like this anymore? Then you do." "Oh, forgive me," she sneered. "Should I pity you? Should I weep for the poor human who was handed a throne he never earned, who was given power he could never wield properly? Tell me, does it burn you inside, knowing you are a mockery of everything our empire stands for?" Her words had bite, claws, fangs, but I didn't flinch. Instead, I leaned back in my chair, tilting my head slightly. "I think what really burns you is the fact that your father trusted me more than he trusted any of you." The air shifted. The tension in the room solidified, thick enough to cut. Nixiri's entire body went rigid, fury twisting across her features, like a storm ready to break. For the first time, even the others reacted. Vaelith's fingers twitched slightly against the table. Zerena's smirk froze just a fraction, And Solara's gaze sharpened into something almost dangerous. Because that was the truth. None of them wanted to say out loud. Their father hadn't just decreed this union as a political move. He had chosen me over them. And they hated it. Nixiri stood so abruptly that her chair scraped against the marble floor, the sound cutting through the air like a blade. Without another word, she turned and stormed out, the long silken train of her garments billowing behind her like the remnants of a dying flame. A beat of silence followed. Then Zyrena chuckled. "Oh, I do like you," she murmured. Valith's glare could have shattered glass. "You are playing with fire," I shrugged. "Then maybe it's time someone burned the old rules down." Solara leaned forward slightly, her silver eyes unreadable. "Do you truly believe that?" I met her gaze. "I think your father did." She tilted her head, studying me for a moment longer. Then, without another word, she stood and followed Nixiri out of the chamber. One by one, the others left as well, until I was alone in the vast, silent dining hall. I let out a slow breath, raking a hand through my hair. This was only the beginning, and something told me it was going to get a hell of a lot worse before it got better. The night air was thick with the scent of exotic flora, a cool breeze carrying the distant hum of the capital beyond the palace walls. I walked through the corridors, the silence stretching around me, only broken by the occasional flicker of torchlight against the obsidian pillars. I wasn't sure where I was going, or maybe I did. Maybe, despite the sheer insanity of my situation, despite the political tightrope I was now walking, I still had instincts that pushed me in the right direction, or toward danger, and Nixiri was definitely both. I found her in the royal gardens, a secluded terrace overlooking the endless sprawl of the Empire's cities. She stood at the edge, her arms crossed over her chest, her jaw set in quiet rage. The moonlight carved her out of the night, casting her skin in silver, making her look more like some celestial wraith than the spoiled, wrathful princess who had spent every waking moment making sure I knew how much she loathed me. I leaned against one of the pillars, watching her. "You gonna throw me off the balcony, or are we just brooding out here?" She tensed. "Leave." No. Her fingers dug into her arms, nails pressing against the dark silk of her sleeves. "Do you enjoy provoking me, human?" "You make it easy." Nixiri whirled then, her silver eyes gleaming in the dim light. "You think this is a game? That you can just waltz into our empire and pretend you belong?" "No," I said simply. "But I also didn't ask for this, and neither did you." She scoffed, turning away again. "Then leave." I exhaled, stepping forward. "You think I wouldn't if I could?" Silence. A long, stretched-out pause. Watched her shoulders rise and fall, tension coiling tight, like a bowstring pulled to its very limit. When she finally spoke, her voice was quieter. "Then why are you still here?" I considered that. The truth was, I could have tried to run. Maybe I should have. But the weight of the Emperor's will wasn't just a political maneuver. It was a chain, one that bound me not just to this empire, but to the 4 women who had been dragged into this just as much as I had. "You know why," I said. She let out a sharp breath. "And yet, you play along." "You mean like you?" That got a reaction. She turned, eyes narrowing. "Do not compare us." I took another step closer. "Why not? You could have left too. You had power, influence, and yet you stayed." Her fingers curled into fists. "Because my father—" "Your father is gone." The words came out colder than I meant them to, but they were the truth. A painful, undeniable truth. Nixiri's lips parted slightly, her breath hitching just enough for me to notice. For the first time, her anger flickered, not extinguished, but shaken. I softened, just a little. "You're angry, I get it, but not just at me." She didn't answer, didn't move. She just stood there, the night wind rustling through her hair, her gaze locked onto mine, like she was trying to decide whether to strike or shatter. I could feel the tension twisting between us, thick and suffocating. It wasn't just hatred. No, hatred was simple. This was something else, something raw, something dangerous. And for the first time, I realized she was just as lost as I was. She turned abruptly, her voice tight. "Go back inside." I didn't. Not right away. Instead, I watched as she disappeared into the shadows of the palace, her footsteps fading into the night. I exhaled. This was going to get complicated. I barely had time to process what had just happened before the next crisis hit. Because, of course it did. The next morning, I woke to the sound of raised voices echoing through the halls. By the time I reached the grand chamber, the tension was already thick enough to cut. Vaylith stood at the center, her expression as unreadable as ever, but her stance rigid. Solara was beside her, composed, but there was something cold in her eyes. Zyrena lounged on one of the carved stone seats, amused as always, but even she seemed more interested than usual. And Nixiri. She was standing at the far end, arms crossed, her entire body wound tight like a coil ready to snap. All of them, focused on the figure standing before them. A figure I recognized immediately. Commander Tyrax. He was a legend, a warlord who had served their father for decades, his name synonymous with conquest and brutality. He was also one of the most powerful figures in the Empire, now that the Emperor was gone, and judging by the look on his face, he was not happy. "I will not sit idly by while you allow this mockery to continue," Tyrax snarled, his voice a low, dangerous growl. "The Emperor's will was final, but that does not mean we are bound to accept it without challenge." Vaylith's gaze was like steel. "You would defy our father's last decree. I would see this empire in the hands of those fit to rule," he shot back. His gaze flicked to me, full of undisguised contempt. "Not this," I exhaled. "You know, you could just say my name. Everyone else does." Tyrax didn't so much as flinch. "You should not be here." "Well, I am," I said. "So maybe we should figure out how to deal with that instead of standing around glaring at each other." The temperature in the room seemed to drop. Tyrax's lips curled in disgust. "Do you think this is amusing, human?" "No," I said honestly. "But I do think you're wasting everyone's time." Silence. Zyrena let out a soft, wicked laugh. "Oh, I do love him." Tyrax's expression darkened. "You are not fit to lead. You are not fit to rule. And you are certainly not fit to stand beside them." I tilted my head. "And yet, here I am, again. So maybe you should start asking why your emperor thought differently." Tyrax's eyes burned. His mind was failing. He was not— "Careful!" Vaylith cut in sharply. Tyrax hesitated. He looked at her, then at Solara, then at Nixiri, who had remained unnervingly silent through the entire exchange. Then he exhaled. "You have 3 days," he said finally. 3 days to prove you deserve to be here. If you cannot, then this farce ends, one way or another." Then he turned and left, the sound of his boots echoing through the chamber. I exhaled. Well, that went well. Vaylith shot me a glare that could have melted steel. "Do you understand what you've done?" "Not really." She stepped closer, her presence towering. "He is giving us 3 days before he makes his move. 3 days before the council begins to question everything. And 3 days before every enemy waiting in the shadows decides it is time to strike." Zyrena smirked. "Oh, I do love a good deadline." Nixiri finally spoke, her voice low. "Then we better make them count." And for the first time, she didn't sound like she hated me, just like she was ready to fight. And that was a start. The moment the chamber doors slammed shut behind Tyrax, the weight of what had just happened pressed down on me like a vice. 3 days. That was all we had. 3 days before the Empire, the Council, and every ambitious noble with a taste for blood decided whether or not I was worth keeping alive. I exhaled slowly, So, no pressure. Valith turned on me like a storm. Do you think this is a joke? Not at all, I said. I think it's a threat, which means we need a plan. Solara, ever the composed one, folded her arms. The plan is survival, and for that, we need control. Zerena lounged against the stone throne, smirking as always, but there was something sharper in her gaze. Now. Oh, I do love a good coup. Not a coup, Solara corrected coolly. A consolidation. Nixiri finally spoke, her voice low. We need to prove we are stronger together than apart. I blinked at her. Did you just say we? She met my gaze, unwavering. Don't get used to it. Well, progress. Valith rubbed her temple. We have to act before Tyrax does. He controls the military. The moment he moves, the moment he calls for a formal challenge, it will be too late. I nodded. So we move first. Zerena grinned. Now you're talking. Solara tilted, her head. And what exactly do you propose? I took a deep breath. We make them believe. Nixiri narrowed her eyes. Believe what? I met her gaze. That I belong here. The silence stretched between us, thick with unspoken tension. Finally, Valith exhaled, nodding once. Then let's begin. The next few hours were a blur of movement, whispered plans, and calculated risks. Every decision mattered now. Every step had to be precise, because if we faltered, if we hesitated, Tyrax would rip this empire from our grasp before we even had the chance to fight for it. And I refused to let that happen. The first step was optics. The nobles, the council, the people, they didn't need to like me. They needed to respect me, to fear me, and more importantly, to believe I was untouchable. Which meant one thing. I needed the princesses at my side, all of them, visibly, unshakably. The moment the doors to the throne room opened, the atmosphere shifted. The nobility had gathered in force, their murmurs filling the grand chamber like the hum of distant thunder. And at the center of it all, Tyrax stood at the foot of the throne, arms crossed, watching. Waiting. I stepped forward, my movements deliberate. Every ounce of hesitation burned away, because I couldn't afford it. Not now. The moment I reached the throne, I turned, facing them, the weight of 1,000 eyes pressing down on me. And then, one by one, the princesses stepped forward. Valith was first, her stance regal, her presence commanding. She moved beside me without hesitation, her gaze sweeping over the room with the authority of someone who had been raised to rule. Solara followed, her movements fluid, composed. She was the diplomat, the tactician, the one who knew how to wield silence like a blade. And as she stood beside me, her posture unwavering, she sent a clear message. She had chosen a side. Zerena was next, her smirk lingering, but her amusement didn't quite reach her eyes. This was a game to her, yes, but a deadly one. And as she leaned casually against the armrest of the throne, her fingers idly tracing the ornate carvings, she made it clear. She wasn't just here for the chaos. She was here to win. And finally, Nixiri. She hesitated for the briefest moment, the slightest pause. Then she stepped forward. Her presence was sharp, a blade drawn but not yet swung. And as she came to stand beside me, her expression unreadable, the entire room seemed to still. Because with that single movement, with that one undeniable gesture, she had made her choice. They all had. Tyrax's expression darkened. This fast changes nothing. I tilted my head. Doesn't it? He took a slow step forward. You may have them fooled, but you do not fool me, human. I don't need to fool you, I said, my voice steady. I just need to remind you that I am here and I am not leaving. The tension cracked like a whip. For a moment, Just a moment. Tyrax hesitated. Then he exhaled sharply. 3 days, he murmured. Use them wisely. And with that, he turned and strode out of the chamber, his cloak billowing behind him. The room remained silent. Then finally, Zerena laughed. Oh, I do love making warlords nervous. Vaelith shot her a look. This isn't a game. No, I agreed. It's survival. Solara exhaled. Then we better make it count. And as the doors slammed shut behind us, I realized this was only the beginning. The real battle had just begun. The weight of the moment lingered long after the nobles had dispersed, their whispered conspiracies trailing behind them like the ghosts of unspoken war. I sat on the throne, not out of arrogance, but necessity, a symbol, a statement, the human interloper who now wielded the inheritance of a king. The 4 princesses flanked me, each one an unspoken force of nature. Their presence wasn't just ornamental, it was a warning, a declaration that the empire wasn't as divided as Tyrax wanted to believe. Not yet, at least. Vaelith was the first to break the silence, pacing in front of the dais, her hands clenched behind her back. You know this doesn't end here, I nodded. Tyrax is already planning his next move. Solara studied me, arms crossed, expression unreadable. And what is yours? I leaned forward, resting my elbows on my knees. The same as his. We make our move before he does. Zerena stretched lazily against the throne's armrest, her lips curling in a smirk. And what? You expect us to seduce the council into obedience? I didn't blink. If that's what it takes. That got her attention. A flicker of something dark and entertained danced across her gaze. But it was Nyxiri who scoffed first. Your arrogance is insufferable. I exhaled, turning my gaze on her. Do you want to die, Nyxiri? Her eyes narrowed into slits. Excuse me. I'm asking if you want to die, I repeated, voice calm. Because that's what happens if we lose. Tyrax isn't going to let you live. He won't let any of you live. The second I fall, you all fall with me. So, tell me, do you want to die? A crackle of tension filled the air. Nyxiri's lips pressed together, her jaw tight. But she didn't answer, because she already knew the answer. Solara broke the silence first. Then let's be clear on what we're dealing with. Vaelith nodded. Tyrax controls the military. We control the throne. Barely, Zerena added. I looked to Solara. How much sway do you have with the nobles? She exhaled. Enough to buy time, not enough to stop a coup. I nodded. Then we don't just need loyalty, we need fear. Vaelith's brows lifted slightly. You intend to make an example of someone? I stood. Not someone. Something. The throne room doors opened, and a pair of royal guards entered, bowing. You sent for us, my lord? It still felt strange, hearing that title, but I didn't flinch. Summon the heads of the noble houses. A private audience. The guards hesitated, just for a second. Then they nodded and left. Solara frowned. You mean to confront them? I met her gaze. I mean to make them choose. The chamber was smaller than the grand throne room, more intimate. A circular council hall, designed for private audiences with the most powerful members of the empire. The room was already half filled with nobles by the time I arrived, each one wearing the carefully curated expressions of those who had spent their entire lives navigating the razor's edge of politics. Tyrax was absent, but his influence wasn't. The moment I stepped into the chamber, I felt the weight of it. The silent war being waged in whispers and exchanged glances. Every noble here was watching, waiting to see if I would falter. I didn't give them the chance. I moved to the center of the room, the princesses forming a loose perimeter around me. Then I spoke. You all knew the king, I said, voice steady. You knew his power, his wisdom, his strength. No one answered. But they didn't need to. I let the silence stretch for just a moment before continuing. And yet, when his will was read, you questioned it. A ripple of unease passed through the gathered nobles. You questioned his judgment, I continued, taking a slow step forward. You questioned his final command, and now I have to wonder, how many of you are questioning your loyalty? A noble to my right shifted, his throat bobbing slightly. Good, I exhaled. The Empire does not have the luxury of division. Division? One of the nobles scoffed, stepping forward. He was older, a veteran of the court, one of Tyrax's key supporters. You speak as though unity is an option. But let me ask you this. Human. What does an empire gain by following an outsider? I held his gaze. A future. The man's lips curled. A future built on what? Weakness? I smiled. And then I moved. Faster than he could react, I was on him, gripping the hilt of his ceremonial dagger. The moment he realized what was happening, his eyes widened, but it was too late. I drew the blade from its sheath and pressed the edge against his throat, feeling his pulse jump beneath the steel. The room went deathly silent. I leaned in, my voice quiet. Do I feel weak to you? He didn't answer. I turned my gaze to the gathered nobles, making sure to meet their eyes. One by one, I am not your enemy, I said. Tyrax is. I eased the blade away from the noble's throat and offered it back to him, hilt first. He hesitated. Then, slowly, he took it. I stepped back. Your loyalty does not belong to me, I said. It belongs to the throne, to the empire, to your king. I let that hang for a beat before adding, and your king chose me. A ripple of uncertainty spread through the room. Some of them lowered their gazes. Others exchanged wary glances, but no one spoke. Zyrena chuckled, softly. I think you got their attention. I ignored her. 3 days, I said. That's all the time we have before Tyrax makes his move. So, ask yourselves now, where will you stand? Another long silence. Then, finally, one by one, the nobles bent the knee. It wasn't absolute loyalty. Not yet. But it was enough. For now. The chamber still thrummed with the echoes of bending knees, but I knew better than to believe it was victory. Loyalty wasn't granted in a moment. It was bought, bargained for, tested. And Tyrax wasn't the type to allow his grip on power to loosen without a fight. Solara, ever the strategist, watched the nobles closely as they left. Her golden eyes scanned for hesitation, doubt, any flicker of allegiance that leaned in the wrong direction. They will break the second they feel the wind shift, she murmured. Then we don't let the wind shift, I said. Valith folded her arms, shifting her weight slightly. That's easier said than done. Tyrax has controlled the military for years. He's spent his life ensuring his position. Zarena's smirk widened, which means we just have to give him something he doesn't expect. I nodded, turning to Nixiri. She had been the quietest of them all so far, but I knew better than to mistake that for passivity. She was observing, calculating. Her expression had hardened into something unreadable, but when I met her gaze, she held it without flinching. Tyrax's men will move soon, I said. We need to make sure when they do, they're looking in the wrong direction. Nixiri's lips parted slightly, a breath of laughter escaping. You want a distraction? I tilted my head. I want a war on his terms. And then, I want to change the terms. She studied me for a long moment, then exhaled. I might have an idea. Valith raised a brow. I assume it involves something dramatic. Nixiri smirked. You assume correctly. The palace halls felt different at night. Shadows stretched longer, curling in corners like waiting sentinels. The torches flickered in their sconces, painting everything in warm, molten gold. But despite the illusion of calm, the tension in the air was palpable. Nixiri led the way, her steps silent against the polished floor. The other 3 followed behind us, moving like ghosts. The guards stationed along the corridors barely spared us a glance. After all, who would question the movements of the royal family? We reached the war chambers without incident. Inside, a massive table dominated the space, the intricate map of the empire etched into its surface. Miniature markers represented fleets, armies, strategic holdings. It was a visualization of power, a game board where every move dictated the fate of millions. Nixiri traced a fingertip along the map's surface, stopping at a particular point near the northern border. "This fortress," she murmured. Solara frowned. "One of Tyrax's." Nixiri nodded. "Not his stronghold, but vital to his supply chain. If something were to happen to it, he'd be forced to redirect his focus." Zerena's grin was pure mischief. "Are you suggesting sabotage, dear sister?" Nixiri glanced at me. "I'm suggesting a message." Valith exhaled slowly. "If we do this, we commit to war." I met her gaze. War was committed the second Tyrax decided to take the throne for himself. Solara studied the map, her fingers tapping against her arm. "We'll need to be fast. Surgical. If he suspects it was us before we're ready, he'll retaliate immediately." Nixiri smirked. "Then let's not give him time to suspect." The mission was dangerous. That was the first thought that ran through my head as I crouched behind a stack of crates, watching the fortress from a distance. The walls loomed high, layered with thick defensive plating. Guards patrolled in shifts, their weapons gleaming under the cold light of the moons. The plan was simple. Nixiri and I would infiltrate, plant the charges, and slip away before anyone noticed. Meanwhile, Solara, Zirena, and Valith would handle the diversion. I turned to Nixiri. "Last chance to back out." She shot me a look that was almost insulted. "You think I scare easily?" I grinned. Not even a little. The two of us moved like shadows, slipping through the perimeter undetected. The guards were competent but predictable, their patrol patterns easy to read. We wove between them like whispers in the dark, pressing ourselves against walls when necessary, pausing only when the distant clank of armor signaled movement. Once inside, the fortress was a maze of stone and metal, corridors winding like veins through a living organism. But Nixiri moved like she belonged there, guiding me through twists and turns with effortless precision. "This way," she whispered. We reached the main storage chamber, a massive vault filled with supply caches, weapons, and enough rations to sustain an army. The perfect place for destruction. Nixiri knelt, pulling a small device from the folds of her cloak. She pressed a sequence on its surface, and tiny red lights flickered to life along its edge. I watched as she carefully placed it against the wall, securing it between crates of explosives. 3 minutes, she murmured. I nodded. "Then let's not be here when it blows." We turned, moving swiftly back through the corridors. But just as we neared the exit, "Stop!" The voice was sharp. We froze. A guard stood at the other end of the hallway, his weapon half raised. His eyes flicked between us, narrowing in suspicion. "What are you doing here?" Nixiri didn't hesitate. She stepped forward, her expression slipping effortlessly into one of royal indignation. "How dare you question me?" The guard hesitated. Nixiri continued, her tone laced with authority. "Do you know who I am? Shall I summon the commander and inform him that his men lack the proper discipline to recognize a member of the royal house?" The guard faltered, uncertainty creeping into his stance. I apologize, my lady. I stepped in, voice low and sharp. "You just forgot your place." He swallowed. Then finally, he lowered his weapon. "Of course, my lady. I meant no offense." Nixiri exhaled softly. "See that it doesn't happen again." We strode past him, our steps controlled, our pace steady. It wasn't until we were well beyond his sight that Nixiri allowed the smallest smirk to curl her lips. "Nicely done," I murmured. She arched a brow. "You doubted me." "Never." We slipped through the last corridor, exiting just in time to hear the distant rumble of the explosion. The ground trembled beneath us, a rush of heat blooming against my back as fire and smoke burst from the fortress. Screams followed, shouts, The alarms blared to life, but it was already too late. Tyrax would hear of this, and that was exactly what I wanted. The fortress burned behind us, flames licking the night sky like the hungry tongues of a beast unleashed. The explosion had done its job. Smoke billowed in thick plumes, filling the air with the acrid scent of burning metal and shattered stone. The cries of scrambling soldiers echoed through the valley as chaos consumed them. I didn't look back. We didn't need to. Nixiri and I moved swiftly through the darkness, our silhouettes vanishing into the wilderness before Tyrax's forces could regroup. Every step away from that wreckage brought us closer to the inevitable confrontation, but I didn't fear it. I welcomed it. Nixiri's breath came fast as she ran beside me, her body lithe and fluid, every movement calculated efficiency. The way the flickering firelight caught the sharp planes of her face made her look almost ethereal, like a goddess of war carved from shadow and embers. She turned her gaze to me, eyes gleaming with something unreadable. That was too close, I smirked, barely winded. But effective. She huffed, but the curve of her lips betrayed her. You enjoy this too much. I shot her a sidelong glance. And you don't. Nixiri didn't answer right away. Instead, she slowed her pace slightly, the adrenaline in her veins not yet burned off. Her fingers flexed, as if she wanted to grip something, anything, to keep herself grounded. Then, quietly, I was raised to be a princess, groomed to be a political tool. I was never supposed to love war, I arched a brow. And yet here you are, setting your uncle's empire on fire. A ghost of a smile flickered across her face. Here I am. The truth lay unspoken between us. She was meant to be a piece on someone else's board, but tonight she had rewritten the game. We reached the rendezvous point, slipping past the last line of foliage into the clearing where the others waited. Solara was the first to approach, her sharp gaze raking over us. Any trouble? Nothing we couldn't handle, I replied. Vaelith, ever pragmatic, took in the distant blaze with a slow nod. That should keep Tyrax occupied. Zerena grinned, looking entirely too pleased with herself. I almost wish I could see his face when he hears the news. Nixiri exhaled, finally allowing herself to relax. We need to move before his forces sweep the area. Solara nodded. Agreed. We'll return to the palace and prepare for the next phase. The next phase. The words lingered between us like a silent promise. We had thrown the first stone. Now we braced for the avalanche. The palace was eerily silent when we returned. Not because it was empty, but because the weight of what we had done had settled over it like an unseen storm. The nobles were restless. Tyrax's allies had gone unchallenged for too long. And now that I had broken the first thread of his influence, the entire court was waiting to see what happened next. Would I falter? Would I prove to be an unworthy inheritor of the king's will, or would I rise? The 4 princesses stood with me in the grand chamber, each one a pillar of a legacy greater than themselves. Solara, the tactician, her mind already 10 steps ahead, calculating every potential response from Tyrax. Vaelith, the warrior, her posture at ease, but her hand never far from the hilt of her blade. Zerena, the unpredictable one, her smirk a mystery, her motives a wildfire no one could contain. And Nixiri, the quiet storm, standing at my side, her presence a reminder that I was not alone in this battle. They weren't just my allies, they were mine, bound to me by the will of their father, tied to me in ways that neither history nor blood could erase, and that truth burned hotter than any war Tyrax could bring. The first challenge arrived before dawn. Tyrax's response was as swift as it was brutal. A message was delivered, not in ink, but in blood. One of my newly sworn noble allies was found dead outside the palace gates, his body displayed as a warning, a blade through the chest, his mouth stuffed with the official decree that had named me heir to the throne. It was a declaration. Tyrax was telling me, in no uncertain terms, that this would not be a quiet coup. He would not go gently into the shadows. He would fight, and so would I. The council convened immediately. The chamber was filled with voices, some panicked, some furious, some calculating. The weight of their gazes bore down on me, waiting for my response. Would I retreat? Would I cower? I rose from my seat, my voice cutting through the noise like a blade. This was not a warning, I said. It was a mistake. Silence. I stepped forward, my gaze sweeping over the assembled nobles. Tyrax believes this will frighten us into submission, I continued, that we will shrink in fear and allow him to reclaim what is not his. I let the words hang in the air. Then, coldly, he is wrong. The room stirred, whispers turning into murmurs of agreement. Solara watched me carefully, something unreadable flickering in her gaze. Valith smirked, crossing her arms. I assume you have a response planned. Zyrena chuckled. Oh, I know what he's about to say. Nyxiri's lips curved. Then let's make it happen. I met their gazes. No more waiting, I said. No more caution. Tyrax had made his move. Now it was my turn, and I would not miss. By the time the council dispersed, the scent of battle was already thick in the air. Not from bloodshed, not yet, but from the weight of unspoken declarations. The nobles who had once sat on the fence, unsure of whether I was truly a threat to Tyrax, were beginning to shift. The room had started divided, some loyalists to the old ways, some opportunists, and some afraid of the consequences of defying a warlord. But fear was a funny thing. When left unchecked, it could cripple a kingdom. But when harnessed, when sharpened like a blade and wielded with precision, fear could become a weapon. And tonight, I was wielding it. I stepped out onto the high balcony overlooking the palace courtyard, where the royal guards stood in perfect formation below. The banners of the late king still hung, though their colours felt hollow now, remnants of a man whose rule had been stolen before its time. Solara stood beside me, her sharp gaze sweeping over the soldiers. She spoke without looking at me. The council is still uncertain. They won't be for long. Vailith leaned against one of the marble pillars, arms crossed. You're not planning to give them time to think, are you? A smirk tugged at the corner of my mouth. Thinking is dangerous. Zyrena chuckled. For them? Or for us? I met her gaze. For Tyrax. Nyxiri exhaled slowly, watching me with that same intensity she always did, like she was searching for something just beneath the surface. What are you planning? I let the question hang for a moment before answering. We draw him out. Solara's brows furrowed slightly. That's not as simple as it sounds. It doesn't have to be. I turned to face them fully, letting the tension in the air settle around us. We make this war personal, I said. No more subtle moves. No more waiting for him to pick us apart piece by piece. I gestured to the courtyard below. The people need to see strength. They need to know that I'm not just some foreigner playing at royalty. Zyrena arched a brow. And how exactly do you plan to show them that? I met her gaze, then shifted to Nyxiri. You're the rightful heir, I said to her. But the people don't see you that way yet. You were kept out of politics, groomed for an arranged marriage that never came to pass. Nyxiri's jaw tightened. I know. I took a step closer, lowering my voice. Then change it. Her breath hitched slightly. I didn't miss the way her fingers flexed at her sides, the way her lips parted as if she wanted to say something but wasn't sure if she should. Stand beside me, I continued. Not as a princess waiting for someone else to make decisions for her, but as a ruler, she swallowed. You want me to stand before the people and declare my allegiance to you? I tilted my head slightly. Is that so unthinkable? Her breath came a little faster. Not from fear, not from hesitation, but from something else, something far more dangerous. The weight of my words settled between us like a tether drawn too tight. She wasn't just a pawn in this war, she was the key to it, and she knew it. I watched the battle play out in her expression, the war between duty, desire, and the undeniable pull of the path we were carving together. Then finally, she nodded. "All right," she murmured. "Let's show them who we are." The announcement came at sunrise. The entire palace had been called to the grand courtyard, where banners of the royal family billowed in the early morning wind. The nobles had gathered, murmuring amongst themselves, uncertainty thick in the air. The common folk stood just beyond the palace gates, eager for any sign of what was to come. And at the heart of it all, Nixiri and I stood side by side. She was dressed in ceremonial attire, the deep indigo of her robes marking her lineage as royal blood. A silver circlet adorned her brow, the crest of her father gleaming in the sunlight. I, on the other hand, had chosen something far more deliberate. I wore the cloak of the late king. Gasps rippled through the crowd as they took in the sight. It was a direct challenge, a symbol of inheritance not yet officially claimed. The moment I stepped onto the dais wearing that cloak, I was no longer just a foreigner standing in the shadows of dead rulers. I was a contender. The murmurs grew louder. Uncertainty turned to speculation. The air was thick with tension, charged, like a storm about to break. Then, Nixiri stepped forward, and the world held its breath. Her voice rang out, clear and unwavering. "You all knew my father." Silence fell. She let the weight of her words settle before continuing. "You knew his strength, his wisdom, his vision for this kingdom." She turned her gaze to the nobles. "And you knew his enemies." Murmurs, shifting feet, nervous glances. She let them stir for only a moment before she pressed forward. "My uncle Tyrax has defied everything my father built. He seeks to twist this kingdom into his own design, to strip it of its honor and rule by fear." Her voice grew sharper, a blade of conviction cutting through the air. "I will not allow it." A slow murmur of agreement rippled through the crowd. Then she turned to me. "And neither will he." Gasps, whispers. The weight of her words crashed through the assembly like a thunderclap. She turned back to the gathered court. "I stand with him," she declared, "not as a pawn, not as a princess waiting to be traded away." Her voice hardened. "But as the rightful heir to my father's throne." Shockwaves pulsed through the gathering. This wasn't just a statement of alliance. It was a declaration of war. The shift was almost immediate. The nobles who had hesitated, the ones who had been too afraid to choose sides, suddenly, they weren't looking at a foreigner pretending at power. They were looking at something far more dangerous, a unified front, a ruler and his queen. And they understood in that moment. This was no longer a quiet power struggle. This was a reckoning.